Hello learner, I am Dr. Vijay Kumar, Department of Philosophy, Shama Prasad Mukherjee College, University of Delhi. Topic of the lecture is environmental ethics, issues and concerns. So, we will learn in this lecture that what is environmental ethics and what are the issues and concerns when we deal the environmental ethical perspectives. In that way, first of all, I will tell you that this topic, environmental ethics, comes under the course of IGNOU Applied Ethics. So, under that applied ethics, we will discuss environmental ethics, and in that way, I also would like to first tell you that broadly speaking, this applied ethics is known as the moral philosophy or the ethics. So, let us first discuss what is ethics. So, what do you mean by the ethics? And ethics, if we look at the term ethics came from a Greek word ethos, which means the custom, habit, and character or disposition of people. Ethics tell us about what is good for individual and society. At the same time, ethics attempts to answer the question like what is good life, how to act well and rightly, etc. And ethics is also known as moral philosophy. Moral philosophy is the philosophical thinking about morality, moral problems, and moral judgments. When we talk about the ethics, there are three different approaches of ethics. You can look at the slide itself then. These three approaches is known as meta-ethics, normative ethics, and applied ethics. As I have told you already that environmental ethics comes under the applied ethics. Applied ethics is a comparatively new discipline of the moral philosophy. It emerged as a discipline of studies after mid of 20th century. That is why in environmental ethics as well, comparatively new discipline of the studies or the moral studies rather you can say. As in applied ethics, we try to understand contemporary moral issues from ethical perspective. So therefore, we apply moral principles in our day-to-day life or day-to-day issues. That is why this is known as the applied ethics. So, as I told you again, applied ethics also discuss various contemporary issues, and one of the most important contemporary issues is environmental ethics. So now question is, what is environmental ethics? If we talk about environmental ethics, it is the application of moral considerations in the area of environmental issues is known as environmental ethics or ecological ethics. So, broadly speaking, this environmental ethics is the branch of applied ethics that attempts to provide the moral grounds for the preservation and restoration of ecological balance of nature. So, you might note that environmental ethics is about the nature or natural issues. Again, we can say environmental ethics attempts to know the metaphysical status of human and non-human components of environment. And in fact, this feature of environmental ethics is the most fundamental feature. Here, we want to know the status or the metaphysical status of human and non-human component of environment so that we can assign the value to these two components. So therefore, this in some sense you can say a key definition of the environmental ethics. Again, in the same way, it also discusses the moral status of human being as well as the non-human natural world. Environmental ethics also explores the possibility of rational arguments for assigning intrinsic value to the non-human contents of the natural environment. So, therefore, it is the discipline which simply discuss the moral status of the environmental component like human and non-human together. Now, we see the issues after the defining the environmental ethics. What is this and what is subject matter? So, there are certain issues which is very important in environmental philosophical discourse. As there are the issues, so are the concerns. So, therefore, we will try to understand now what are the issues and what are the concerns of environmental philosopher. As some glimpse you have already got about the subject matter. So, therefore, now you can see that there are 5 issues which we will discuss, though list may be long. In fact, it is a long list, but the lecture will be restricted to most 5 important issues and concerns. And in that series, the first issue is actually human-nature relationship. Human-nature relationship, as I told you, this is the basic question of the environmental ethics, that how can deal the human and nature relationship, whether they are equal component of the natural cosmos or there is a difference in terms of the moral status. That is the question now. And if we talk about the approaches, environmental ethics basically here give 2 sort of answer to this question, that what is human nature relationship. The first approach is anthropocentrism. As the term says, anthropo means the human. So, this anthropocentrism is known as actually the root cause of our ecological crisis. Now, this anthropocentrism consider human being as the center of all epistemological, metaphysical as well as moral discourses. Similarly, anthropocentrism, or those eco-philosophers who believe in anthropocentrism, assigned intrinsic value to the humans only. And in fact, just for your consideration, and rather you should keep in your mind when we talk about the values in terms of the environmental philosophy specifically, we divide values in 2 groups. On the one hand, we have intrinsic value, and on the other hand, we have extrinsic value. Intrinsic value, we say that things have an intrinsic value when the thing is important in itself. It cannot be used as a means, rather it is the ends only. On the other hand, extrinsic value is instrumental value. Like when we say something is important or morally respectable, so what is the ground? Whether the thing is respectable in itself or just for the use of the others. So, in that way, anthropocentrism consider that humans only pass the test of intrinsic value. On the other hand, the rest of the non-human entities have only extrinsic values. So, in contrast to the anthropocentrism, there comes the second approach, ecocentrism. And ecocentrism is a holistic perspective of human and nature relationship. Here, this ecocentrism takes its methodological inputs from ecology, or you can say ecosystem. So, sometimes it is known as ecosystem ethics as well. This ecocentrism again accepts that all the entities of natural world are interrelated and interdependent. On the other hand, as I told you, contrast to the anthropocentrism, this ecocentrism assigned intrinsic value not only the human but rather the whole of nature. The second issues which is very much important for the eco-philosopher is the animal welfare. You might have seen in our house we have the animals, but there are certain concern about the animals as well. Like, or even have you ever think that as the human being we have the rights, so can we say animals also have the right? Because our concern is that animal welfare, and if we want to talk about, we want to do about animal welfare, then we need certain moral understanding or moral conceptual framework so that we can talk about the animal welfare. And this whole concept of animal welfare depend upon that animal rights, animal testing, factory farming, wildlife conservation. Animal rights. Why if human beings have the rights, then why non-human animals cannot have the right? That is the one question. Again, if suppose animals have no right, then the question of animal welfare become meaningless. Likewise, scientists do lot of testing in the laboratories. Then again the question comes that is this morally acceptable? Is this morally right to test on the animals? And if we test the animals, can we not say that we are violating their rights? So therefore, animal testing and animal rights are very much related. Same is the case with the factory farming. We know we just produce animals just for test purpose or sometime dietary purpose. So again the question is that should we not have the compassion? Should we not do their welfare or conserve them? Like when the issue of the conservation comes. So one of the issue of environmental ethics is wildlife conservation as well. That what is the ground, what is the moral ground that we should preserve or conserve the wildlife? Again, in the same way, like animals, on what ground we can say animals have the right? Why we should oppose, why should not morally accept that animal testing is fine? So therefore, when we talk about animal welfare, the issues which we are concerned about is animal rights, animal testing, factory farming, and wildlife conservation. Similarly, the next issues in the line of environmental ethics is resource management. And in that resource management, the most important question is sustainable development. And this sustainable development is a very, in a sense, ambiguous terms in many sense. And there has been a lot of effort to define what is the sustainable development. And there are certain, as I told you, problem to define the idea of sustainable development. There are contextual complexities, there are conceptual ambiguities, then there are definitional challenges. But if we see that in 1987, a Brundtland Commission tried to define and this whole concept which is acceptable most of the people. And the Brundtland Commission says development which meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. If you minutely observe this definition give you a certain glimpse of the moral considerations. Why? Because it is not only talking about the current present generation, but rather it is giving a consideration to the future generation as well. So therefore, it somehow talk about the intergenerational equity and justice. So therefore, in environmental ethics, one of the important question is how to understand sustainable development, how it is achieved, and what are the moral problems involved in sustainable development. As you can just note if you minutely observe that sustainable development has been defined most of the time in non-philosophical terms. In other words, philosophical concern has not been discussed. So, in moral philosophy, In environmental ethics, one of the question about sustainable development is that how to accept or how to just declare a model of development which can be morally sustainable as well. And if we see the most of the debate about sustainable development, then we see that philosophical debate or the moral issues are not discussed in a proper manner. So therefore, the question of the moral understanding of conceptual development is very much necessary. So therefore, in environmental ethics, we also look after this kind of most important concept of the development from moral perspective as well. Again, then we have the next issue, conservation and preservation, means protecting the planet. Again, you might have seen that lot of the ecological crisis is man-made crisis. Human being has just destroyed the nature, the nature, or rather, it has destroyed the habitat of the non-human beings. Again, because of the human footprint or injudicious exploitation of the nature, there has been a clear threat to the species as well as biodiversity loss. So, the question is again, how to maintain, how to conserve and preserve the nature. Because finally, if suppose we know if there is a loss of biodiversity, then and there is a species extinction, then sometime it may hit human being badly as well, because it is a ecological fact that our ecosystem not only contain human beings, rather ecosystem contain various components as well. So if we consider this earth as an ecosystem, so in that ecosystem, everything is interrelated. If everything is interrelated, interdependent, then automatically if there is loss of biodiversity, if human beings have destruction or destroyed a habitat of the non-human species and just extinct the species, so obviously the problem will be we have to face human being as well. So therefore, in environmental ethics, the issue of the conservation and preservation become very important. And in environmental ethics, we try to give moral input so that we can morally talk about that why we should look after the biodiversity, why we should maintain an ecological balance, why we should not do such kind of act so that the essential component of the ecosystem like animals or non-human species is destroyed. In that way, environmental ethics is very much concerned, raise the issues most importantly manner that we should look after the conservation and preservation of the nature as well. Again, the last in the series, the last issues is environmental justice or ecological equity, sometimes we called. Ecological equity, inequality rather you can say. If we talk about the ecological equality, then we have to look after that how ecologically certain social, environmental disparities are there, inequality in the distribution of the natural resources is there. So therefore, we look here that how the resources of nature can be distributed equally among the stakeholders. So therefore, we noticed in moral philosophy that there is a ecological inequality. As you have seen and you might observe if you look around yourself that everyone, every stakeholder is not getting their dues. And the very famous debate here is the first world country and third world countries. There is an issue that how the first world countries are exploiting or doing injustice even to take the resources of the third world people as well. The second issue you can notice in this context is toxic waste disposal. Frequently, you might have heard in the newspapers that some countries, specifically developed countries, dispose their waste into the territory, specifically in the oceans, the territory of the other countries. Again, even in local standard as well, you see factories are disposing the wastage. And that disposal of the toxic wastage is basically harming the ordinary man or the human habitat which locate around the factories which just dispose that toxic. So therefore, again, there comes the question of the justice, that what is the fault of the people who stay nearby? Why they are paying the price of this ecological hazards being dispersed? So again, environmental philosophy talk about the indigenous rights of the people. And we, in environmental philosophy, discuss that how indigenous people have the rights. They have the rights to the pure air. They have the rights to the clean water. So, and by these toxic wastage disposal, what we are doing, what are the factories doing? They are snatching the indigenous right to life, or right to food, or right to clean water, air, etc. Again, if we see, if there is a ecological inequality, there are the violation of indigenous rights, then there is you simply malign climate. Your climate become polluted. Again, it's create the problem of the climate justice. Who has been polluted it? Who has the responsibility to clean it? And why the other people should face the hate? So therefore, in environmental justice, we talk about the ecological equality. To maintain the ecological equality, to distribute natural resources, social resources, environmental resources, in equitable manner rather, among the peoples. So in that way, environmental justice become a very important area of the concern of environmental ethics. By knowing all these issues and concerns, now we can conclude that, first of all, with a key point, in fact, you can say that environmental crisis is a human-made crisis. We know, and you can observe it, that environmental crisis is not natural. It is we only, the human beings only, which have created this crisis, who have polluted the air, who have destroyed the water, the groundwater, who has contaminated the soil, who have destroyed the ecosystems, only human beings. So therefore, ecological crisis is a human-made crisis. Secondly, to resolve the crisis, human needs to change their fundamental beliefs and attitudes about the natural world. As you might note, with the very definition of environmental ethics, the main concern is that how we look after the nature, what kind of moral attitude, belief system we adopt towards the human and non-human world. If we have a partition approach, if we have a moral hierarchical understanding of the natural components, specifically human and non-human, so therefore, if we have that kind of attitude, then obviously we cannot maintain a moral world. Rather, in process to talk about the moral philosophy or environmental ethics, what we need to do, we need to treat human and non-human in equitable manner. We have to consider that both of the component, or human or non-human, have the values or specifically intrinsic values. Values in itself, we cannot simply categorize cannot maintain a metaphysical as well as moral hierarchy that one is superior because the one is having the intrinsic value humans. On the other hand, natural world of the nature is inferior because it has no intrinsic value, rather only extrinsic value. In terms of that understanding of the relationship, therefore, one of the main area of the concern of the environmental ethics is to analyze and redefine the existing relationship between human and non-human natural world on the same line. Means we have to talk about to establish a egalitarian ethics, and in that way we can learn even nature itself. Nature told us that how everything is related, how there are ecosystems, and in ecosystems everything is interrelated and interdependent. So is the case of this universe. We human and the non-human are just two components of the same whole which we call natural world. If we are same component, it means there is no hierarchy. And specifically, morally speaking, it is very hard, rather you can say, to create or to give a moral support of this kind of metaphysical hierarchy in the world. Rather, if we have that kind of unequal treatment, if we create a dualism, a hierarchical dualism between human and non-human, then there is an ecological crisis. We cannot resolve the ecological crisis, environmental crisis, without to having these equal understanding of both human and non-human natural world. And that is the area, that is the issue which environmental ethics look after in most prominent way. And for further reading, if you are interested to know this issue in a much more deeper way, then these are the references. You can go through these books which you can note from the given list of the references. Thank you very much.